good evening, and welcome to our event tonight, Politics and Parenting, Removing the Barriers for New Mothers in Politics. There's an awful lot to discuss tonight, and we've got some absolutely incredible people here to discuss the main issues. But really, we're going to be drilling down into this hostility towards new mothers that still exists in our political system. We're going to talk about why it matters. It may seem obvious to all the very enlightened people probably on this call, but it's worth discussing. But most importantly, because we are never just here to moan, we are going to talk about how to change it. This event, as you all know, is organised by the Centenary Action Group, probably my favourite group. It's a coalition of organisations, activists, politicians, and general all-round superheroes who are campaigning to remove intersectional barriers to women's political participation. We are filming it tonight, so just so you're aware of that. And we do want it to be as interactive as possible. So do tag Centenary Action. It's at Centenary Action on Twitter, if Twitter is your thing. And the hashtag is politics and parenting, the word and not the symbol. So how bad is it? It's pretty bad. 34% of MPs are women. It's kind of remained stubbornly at a third for several parliaments now. And only 4% of parliamentarians come from a Black or minoritized ethnic background. There are no female metro mayors. And it's quite clear, and it's been very clear during this pandemic, that there is a huge woman-shaped hole at the heart of government. In those 92 briefings that we had from Downing Street, just one was hosted by a woman. And sadly, the statistics show that it's not just our vaginas that are the problem, it's our ovaries. In 2013, 45% of female parliamentarians didn't have children, compared to 28% of men. It has got slightly better. In 2017, 39% of women parliamentarians didn't have children, compared to 30% of men. But it shows that really there is still a huge problem there. Why does it matter? Well, it's pretty basic, isn't it? A functioning democracy needs to look like the people it represents. It needs diversity. It needs a plethora of ideas. It needs to show that not only, one type of person will determine how the rest of the country live. And we've also seen historically, through looking at countries that have a more equal and diverse parliament, that more diversity leads to better policy. I had the joy of going to Iceland a few years ago and looking at the history of female representation there. It's one of the most equal societies, of course, as you know, in the world. And the women there told me that before the Women's Alliance started taking their posts up as MPs in that country, nobody was really talking about parental leave or the gender pay gap or daycare. But after they elected those women, those things were on the agenda like never before, and they took action on them decades before many other countries, including our own, sadly. And I think there's a real sense at the moment, when we look at the state of the childcare sector and how childcare is still not considered to be vital infrastructure for this country, when we look at the delay in funding for domestic violence services, when the lockdown first happened, there is a real problem that we need to address. So this stuff really matters. Why is it so hard to be a parliamentarian and be female? Until recently, MPs on parental leave didn't get a proxy vote. So you had the situation where Tulip Siddiq was, in Parliament with her baby to vote. Stella Creasy had to fight hand over fist for maternity cover, which is still not automatic. Kizzy, who's with us fantastically tonight, will explain a lot more about that. But I mean, just imagine that for a second. We have the Parliament that is making the rules for the rest of the country still doesn't have a proper policy on parental leave and cover for parental leave. It's absolute insanity. And the thing that keeps on coming back to me on this is, if the majority of parliamentarians had babies actually gave birth and had to take paternity leave, they would have sorted it out by now, don't you think? There's also late votes, there's long working days, and for many female parliamentarians, unfortunately, there is a lot of online abuse. So we'll hear from the MPs who are with us tonight a little bit more about that. Plus, it's really, really expensive. So we know that women carry the burden of more caring responsibilities, throughout life, not just in Parliament. Because of the gender pay gap, wages are often lower, and they are more likely to be in part-time work. And campaigning is expensive, so that makes it exclusive. If you can't pay for your own travel and your own expenses while you're campaigning, then it's going to be very difficult to get those first steps into a parliamentary career. And so that excludes many women, particularly women on low incomes. And last week, I wrote about help that is at hand, which is from the Activate Collective, which is funded by Emma Thompson and co-founded by Sophie Walker, formerly leader of the Women's Equality Party, which aims to act like a Emily's List in the UK and provide small grants for people from diverse backgrounds so that they can make their first steps into Parliament. So do check that out if you're at all interested in taking this path. They are doing incredible work. And we should have another notable mention for the 50/50 Parliament campaign, who have been running Ask Her to Stand for some time and really encouraging women from all walks of life to encourage other women that they admire to go into Parliament. And I count myself amongst their number, because there is no way I want to be an MP, but I definitely want you to be an MP. Moving on to the most important thing is that things can change and we can be part of that change. Thanks to increasingly loud voices, proxy voting is now allowed for MPs who are taking parental leave. We have had our first locum MP covering Stella Creasy's maternity leave. And tonight we're going to hear from 4 amazing women who are discussing some of those barriers, but more importantly, how we can tear them down. First, we're going to hear from Bethan Syed, MS, Plaid Cymru, member of the Senedd for South Wales West, and Siobhan Bailey MP, who's the Conservative Party MP for Stroud, who will discuss their experiences of being a parent in politics and illustrate the barriers that they have faced. This will be followed by Kizzy Gardner, Westminster's first ever locum MP, who will talk about the solutions and how it's been for her being a locum for Stella when Stella was on maternity leave. And we'll also hear from Olga Fitzroy from Pregnant Then Screwed, definitely probably one of my top 3 campaign groups, who speak on the impact of COVID-19 on pregnant women and mothers, and really drill down on the ideas of why is it so important that we have this representation. Then I'm going to be handing over to you, and you can ask as many questions as you want, get involved, ask your questions in the chat, and we'll choose from them. Like I said, do tweet along, do talk about this, and let's see if we can come up with some solutions together. Thanks so much. I'll hand over to our guests.
Am I speaking first? Hi, my name is Bethan Syed, and I'm a politician in the Senedd in Wales, representing an area, South Wales West, as has been described, since I was 25 years old, and I'm 39, well, I'm going to be 39 next month. So I've been in politics for quite some time now, elected as the youngest female here in our Welsh Parliament, so something I'm really proud about. Thank you for inviting me tonight to speak. I think why I've been invited is because I've recently had a little boy called Idris. He's 7 months old now, and I found that when I became pregnant that there were so many barriers within my own Senedd, my own Parliament, as to how I could make it work for me for the future. So I met with Kizzy because there was no locum cover in our Welsh Parliament, and I wanted to understand what had happened with her and Stella Creasy, but I let her explain that. But I was trying to emulate what she was doing, and to cut a long story short, I had to go to the Remuneration Board, which determines all the new money and finances for politicians, basically taking away that decision from us, so that we could then appeal to them for some sort of locum cover. I was given a part-time staff member, and I was told that it was definitely a staff member. It couldn't be a locum MS, because the locum wouldn't be able to vote, wouldn't be able to do the same things that I would be able to do. So they were very, very clear that it wouldn't be a locum. So Sarah Rees has been working for me. She's done a lot of good campaigning over the years with Pregnant Then Screwed in Wales and many, many other charities here in Wales. And she's been amazing. And she is still amazing, because I'm still off on maternity leave. But she finds it frustrating because she isn't allowed often to go to the top table or be in meetings with politicians, because she is a staff member. And what I wanted when I was campaigning for this role was a locum, to give that role the stature that it needs. So I still think there's lots of campaigning to be done here in Wales to ensure that it's more than a staff member for the future. But I don't think anything is guaranteed either. Other women have been pregnant in our Senedd. The current education minister, for example, had children while in the Senedd, but nothing has changed in that time. So for me, I find it a bit frustrating and a bit shocking, actually, that nothing has changed in the years since 1999. So I'm not taking up too much time. The other aspect I want to campaign on is childcare. There's no creche in our Senedd, and if anybody can tell me if there's childcare after 6 o'clock here in Wales, then I'll give you a medal, because I've tried to find childcare after that time and it's impossible. So I believe that we should have a creche in our Senedd, not only for us as politicians, but for staff and for those who live in the Bute Town area of Cardiff Bay, that we can be as inclusive as possible in our Senedd. The other issue I would want to talk about tonight is job sharing. We missed an opportunity. We had a new legislation passed which allowed 16-year-olds to vote. They will be voting for the first time next May. But unfortunately, they didn't extend that legislation to job sharing. There's another committee that's been set up to look at the prospect of job sharing. When I've been asked about next year and the Senedd elections, I said I definitely would have stood again had there been a job share opportunity, so I could have come back part-time and I could have worked flexibly with another politician with the same type of values and morals as me, but unfortunately that wasn't to be. And so I'd just like to finish by saying, sadly, I've decided to stand down from my role as a politician, although I won't be going anywhere from politics and activism, because I simply don't believe that I can do it. It's a 24/7 environment. I don't want to dissuade people from getting involved in politics, but for me, on a personal level, purely personal, I just thought it wasn't possible. And I also wanted to devote some time to my new baby, and I wanted to try and give him some time. So that's the issues I've been working on in the last year or so, in a nutshell. And I hope to hear and learn from you guys as well. Diolch.
You happy for me to, I'm so sorry to hear that you're standing down. So, and I'm going to really struggle to follow that beautiful accent as well. But so I'm Siobhan. I'm MP for Stroud in Gloucestershire, and I think and my little baby, I don't know whether you can see her. That was today, but she is now coming up 6 months old. But just to take you back a couple of steps, so I was asked to stand. I wasn't working in politics, never been involved in politics. Shouted at the telly a lot, but otherwise not interested at all. And I was asked to stand as a councillor. I said no. I was asked a couple of times by a local guy called Gio. He kept going, and I eventually said yes, and it was the best thing I've ever done. So that ability to stop, exactly what Alexandra did at the beginning of this, is that anybody can ask people to stand. If you meet somebody in council levels, metro mayors, anything, just please do stop them and say, have you thought about public office? Have you thought about taking those steps? I think that's number one. I think my route into MP world, I was absolutely adamant I didn't want to be an MP. I was really happy being a councillor, but actually when I started to see how everything worked, and I was working as a lawyer in family law and recognising there was a lot of clients in my office that should be nowhere near a court and nowhere near lawyers' fees, a lot of Children Act cases, a lot of fights between parents that actually needed work a long time before it gets to a court scenario. And when I looked at the legislation, it's really out of date. The guidelines need updating. And I recognise that actually you could do with being in Parliament to start making those changes and advocate for some improvements. And then I became interested, and I'm so nosy, and I started asking questions. And if you make eye contact with the wrong people in politics, you end up with loads of leaflets to deliver. And then very, very quickly you're on a committee, and then very, very quickly your name's on an application form, and you're making dibs towards standing, and that was kind of the route. And for Stroud, I absolutely love the place. I stalked Stroud and Gloucestershire. I wanted a marginal, so I could win it. I didn't want it to be easy. I wanted a rural marginal, and I stalked the place for a long time, and I was very lucky to win the selection. And I beat two big burly military guys to get that. So I was absolutely, there was no one was going to take it away from me. And I was in place from 2018 to fight an election in 2022. And my husband and I talked about having children. It hadn't really happened. I thought, well, I'll do the politics thing, and let's actually just carry on, enjoy ourselves. Didn't really think about babies, had kind of written it off. And then Boris called the election, and I'd been a candidate at that point for about 18 months, so I was pretty ingrained in the area, but still very much a candidate. And I was pregnant when the election was called. Nobody knew. It was a first trimester, first baby, bit of a surprise. Everything's a bit of a shock. So I didn't tell anybody. I just got on with it. I spent quite a lot of time throwing up behind hedges, and then going back and knocking on doors and having some lovely conversations. And none of my team knew. I didn't want, rightly or wrongly, and some people on here will disagree, but I didn't want a pregnant candidate to be the story, because I know that women can do anything. And I wanted my views and my commitment to Stroud and my ideas for the area to be the story. I didn't want it to be about me having a baby in my belly. So I won, which was absolutely incredible. There was locally a very strong candidate that stood, Labour chap that stood for years, over 20 years. So it was a beautiful surprise to win, and I still feel really privileged every day. And obviously the election was in December, and we found out the results on sort of early hours of Friday morning. We were in Parliament by Sunday getting our passes, and we were in Parliament on Monday starting to put through some quite hefty and serious legislation that I'm not going to talk about because everybody wants to put behind them. But it was straight in there, and there was no stopping for breath. And that just carried on. And then it was Christmas. I got through Christmas. I went back after into the new year, and I announced the pregnancy. And announcing the pregnancy, there was a lot of happiness, but there was also quite a lot of anger from random people. It wasn't even local constituents. I had some my favourite one is the gentleman that said that I was irresponsible with my timing being pregnant. And I just wanted to, ask him whether he's ever learned about a 40-year-old's fertility, B, ask whether he'd remembered that the fact that we didn't know this election was coming. I was supposed to be in place for another few years down the track, and C, just give him a bit of a talking to, because it's a load of nonsense. And comments like that, the underlying point of it is women shouldn't really be in this place, because the minute you start challenging the fact that you can have a child in any job, not just being an MP, any job at all, or whether you should have children, it actually then rules out women. And then it's, you've got to question whether they are actually committed to having women in top jobs. And I think we should all be here and be proud and keep going. So COVID, it's been very interesting. Nobody expected COVID. I was busy going around wanting to level up the country, and then obviously we've got this awful global pandemic. I was then heavily pregnant, and the chief whip called me I think at the beginning of March. I was in the corridor outside here and said, Siobhan, I'm really sorry, Professor Whitty has just said that you're a protected group. I think we're going to need to send you home. I was outraged because I felt fine. My friends here through this amazingly quick baby shower, but I was basically on my own. So from March until 2 weeks ago, I've been effectively on my own with either pregnant or having a baby with the baby, which has been wonderful in many ways. But I've printed out some of the comments that I got, and my assistant is the most amazing person, because I had quite a traumatic birth, and I won't go into those details, but it was about 5 days after having Gigi. I was sat at home with a womb infection, sweating with these things called rigors that make your whole body shake, just feeling absolutely rubbish. And I started getting pings coming through on my phone and people just being generally unpleasant. And my assistant kept all of this from me, but I'll just read you some of these. Sure, let me start you with one of the also. Am I right to find it ironic that you cite childcare issue as a justification for Miss Bailey's failure to make public views, which you most certainly must have, irrespective of whether she is on maternity leave or not? Siobhan should either not have got pregnant or should have found a way to properly represent her constituency. Can I just point out, I worked past my due date. I worked, because obviously we were in a terrible situation. Constituents were struggling for food at that point. All MP staff, I'm sure Kizzy knows, every politician in the land, at whatever level, was running ragged trying to help people at this point. And we just carried on, and I don't begrudge a second of it, but I'd gone past my due date, and I was saying to my husband as I was in Constructions, do you think I can just about do that call with BBC Radio Gloucestershire? And he was like, no, you blooming can't, get off thing. So you just cannot win with some people. Then I had it's absolute Tory policy to avoid contact with anyone and just come up with excuses. When I took paternity leave, not only did I ensure someone was covering my job, but I also worked from home. When will the Conservatives take their jobs seriously? This is not a party political point, by the way, because all MPs have had this, all female MPs. Her withdrawal from such is and will be noted. I really think Siobhan should pick the summer recess to bond with her baby. And stay at work and try and prevent more errors in judgment. After all, the Prime Minister has not yet taken paternity leave. I have also been told recently that I had a deceitful pregnancy and I was using my fertility for public benefit. And the reason for that is, from Gigi being 6 weeks old, I've just taken her to all local appointments. I have been made the most wonderful, wonderful local people. And I just want to say, Stroud people are kind. Most people are kind. There are loons and there are wazzocks that want to give you a hard time, but most people are kind and most people are very, very supportive. And I've been made president of the local canal trust. I've been on the radio. I've discovered Baby Brain live on radio. I've been made the ambassador for the Department for Education's Further Education Committee because I've done so much work on that. I've started campaigns. I've trooped the streets. I've been out with the police with baby Gigi, and it's been a really positive response. So that's not all mum's choice, that was my choice. I'm a new MP, I wanted to do the local work, and Kizzy's got a really good story about an option for a locum. IPSA didn't get back to me about that. I'm happy to deal with that in any questions. We didn't really get that option for me. But I won't go on. I just want to say, don't be put off, because I hope that my story and my if you look up my Instagram, you'll see lots of pictures of a baby being attached to me. And I just wanted to prove that you can do this. And I may make a choice later on, like Bethan's done, to step away, but it absolutely can be done. And we need to challenge all the absolute nonsense as well.
Thanks, Siobhan. I think it's over to me, and I mean, I'm just very angry right now. I'm not going to lie. Hearing those comments it just makes me absolutely infuriated, because firstly, men don't get those comments, and secondly, what right do people think they have to judge you for being a mother? What right do people think they have? I just think it's atrocious. And as you say, it's not a party political issue. This is a gender issue. This is not about party politics. And it just makes me so furious that people think that that's acceptable. But I will try and park my fury while I talk. I actually wanted to start with a section from the Good Parliament report, which was done in 2016. And I think Professor Sarah Childs, who wrote the Good Parliament report, is actually online. So Sarah, I hope you don't mind. Because I think it really speaks to the issue about parental provision and maternity cover. And the bit I'm going to read is from the beginning, which says, historically, the House of Commons has lacked the institutional will to address issues of representation and inclusion for members of Parliament. They are often regarded as individual office holders, which can obscure the wider institutional responsibility to act. Hence, parliamentary reform is too often the result of individual MPs expending significant time and political capital. This is no longer a satisfactory state. The Good Parliament report is for the House as an institution to own. And I think this really speaks into the issue for me. What has happened and what we've seen happen is women have to hold that political capital. They have to spend their political capital arguing about things which are not individual rights. This is an institutional issue. This is what we see endlessly about these institutions, whether you look at racism, gender stuff, ageism, these are institutional issues. And what happens is it gets thrown back to individuals for experiencing it to deal with the backlash and to deal with consequences. And that's very much what we saw in the case of me being the locum MP and the fight that Stella had to put up to get me in there. You know, the role of locum MP, despite me having done it for 8 months, doesn't exist. It's not a role that exists. If you look on IPSA website, it now does talk about maternity rights, which is a step forward, but it says that you can have some money to fund some staff, and that comes back to the point that Bethan was making earlier. On all the paperwork, I was an office manager. On my CV, I kind of have to write that I was an office manager. My parliamentary staff said I was an office manager. So I couldn't attend the things that MPs could attend. I couldn't go and speak to, and in board meetings, I couldn't turn up and have briefings with MPs. I wasn't allowed to do that. So the institution had a massive problem with my existence. And that, again, is not a party political issue. It wasn't the case that one party held up my existence more than others. Actually, just from an institutional point of view, I didn't exist, and my very existence was a problem. And I think what is often put up as a barrier to this is, well, constituents, how are they going to feel? They didn't vote for you. What does that look like? People expect to vote for their MP. But actually, as ever in these cases, the constituents didn't give, they didn't care. They just wanted to be represented. When I was talking to constituents when COVID was happening and getting them life-saving cancer treatment, or talking to them about their workplace, or helping them fight for their rights, making sure they weren't made redundant, getting them flown back from Pakistan, talking to the Foreign Commonwealth Office, they really didn't care whether they were talking to Stella or talking to me. What they wanted was the right to be represented and to make sure their voice was heard. That was their fundamental point. I think in the entire time I was doing that role, we had one person say something kind of snotty online, like, share your contract, how did you get this role? And actually that he wasn't a local constituent, he was just putting his oar into things. So I think we often hear that counter, which is, what about constituents? How are they going to feel about it? And they were just happy to be represented. That's what they wanted. They wanted their voice heard. And once they understood, general people understand what maternity leave looks like. This isn't a problem. The problem is very much, in my mind, squarely with the institution and how we drag it kicking and screaming into the modern era. And I think walking around Parliament, to me, it was very, very clear. When you look at the pictures and you look at how Parliament's set up, it's designed for old white men. It just is. And so I think a big part of the answer is women, like the women you're hearing from tonight, like other women, getting in and getting involved and shouting about what's important. And I'm sure we'll hear from Olga a bit more about Pregnant and Screwed and the difference that it's made to have women's voices. We see in the COVID pandemic, and the fact that I think there was a Hansard that came out last week that said during a debate about COVID, golf was mentioned 10 times. Pregnancy, maternity, and woman wasn't mentioned at all. We have to have representation, and the idea that we're happy for our representatives to not represent us as a United Kingdom is just bonkers to me. I would happily argue with anyone who wants to have that fight. Absolutely, our representatives should represent us. It's really, really important. So I think the importance of the title is a big piece, and I think it goes against the institution, but it made a massive difference being able to say, no, you're not speaking to an office manager, no, you're not talking to a staff member, you're talking to the locum MP, gave a huge authority. And it meant that I was able to do things like write to the Secretary of States, do things like represent the constituents in a local area with a level of authority that, was passed on by Stella. There's no doubt there's a huge amount of trust she had to have in me to do the job well, but it meant that the constituents were able to get representation, which made a massive difference to them. And I think, the fact it doesn't exist still is obviously completely infuriating and a massive barrier. I think we shouldn't underestimate the value and the amazing step forwards that have been made by proxy voting. I think we have to take that win and say, that's amazing, thanks to a lot of the campaigning that's been done and come before us, and a lot of the women online, I'm sure, have been campaigning for that. Proxy voting is huge. Being able to not have to come into the House to do that is, again, infuriating that it took that long and we needed that level of kind of understanding to get it to that place. But it is a massive, massive win. But I think the link between parliamentary activities and constituency activities, the understanding of what an MP's role is in representing your constituency, shouldn't be underestimated. And those two things come hand in glove. I think, especially if you live in your constituency, if you're going out with your baby and everybody knows who you are, people are going to be asking you questions and finding what you're doing, and being able to say, I'm on maternity leave, but here's somebody else who's doing this role. Here's the person you can go to, I think is enormously important. And I think it's also important to note, this is not a catch-all. This is not, as Siobhan said, this is not something that we're going to force people to do. You're not going to be told that if you're going to have a baby, you have to do this. There are other options available, but it seems completely archaic to me that in 2020 the option of having maternity leave is not on the table. You know, Harriet Harman has been talking about this since the 80s, literally talking about this since the 80s, saying that people should have maternity cover in constituency roles. And it's not just MPs, you know, we have our local councillors as well, similarly don't have these kind of provisions. At the moment, only 1/3 of councillors are women. So if we're going to up representation, we have to start thinking about these kind of things. And I think in terms of the solutions, I do think it's a lot about, unfortunately, women spending that political capital, having to get up and burn some of it, which is really unfortunate for the women that are having to do that. Women like Bethan who are having to make those choices, Siobhan is having to make those choices. I think we can all say that good things will come from it, and it's always horrible when you're the person who has to do that. But I think as women, we kind of have to keep fighting the good fight and saying that if we get more of us into these positions, things will start to change. And the tide is changing. Proxy voting is in. We've had a locum MP. Things will continue to go. But one of the things just personally that I found very hard in role was obviously the title being a challenge, not being able to sit in meetings and things. And actually that changed a lot with COVID because everything went online, and so I could join anyway, which made a big difference. But before that, I was, you know, blindly guessing, and I had to go to Stella a lot, who was meant to be on maternity leave, to ask questions because there was no one else to go to because I didn't really exist. And, you know, the Women's Parliamentary Labour Party still don't want to hear from me. Now, we've asked, do you want to hear from Kizzy's experience? And the answer is no. So this, again, it's not a party political issue. There is more to this than that. And I do think it comes back largely to the institution part of it and the problem with dragging it into the 21st century. But, you know, I think we'll get there. I think a lot of the campaigns, the Ask Her to Stand stuff, 50-50, the activist collective that we talked about, you know, we are moving in the right direction, and we have to remember that, I think, and not lose faith. But it's I think as Bethan has said, it's a very frustrating journey to go on. And when you can see the possibilities of what change can look like, and it's just there, if people would just move forward, you can feel it. And agreed with job sharing, I think that would make a massive, massive difference to representation. So I think it's important we don't lose sight of that. That's me.
Okay, I'm next, I guess. My name's Olga Fitzroy, and I work for the charity Pregnant Then Screwed, doing public affairs and policy. So that kind of means I talk to politicians about the issues that we're dealing with, about our campaigns, or if we've got some new research to share that they might be interested in. I came into campaigning and working with Pregnant Then Screwed after I started my own campaign for shared parental leave for freelancers. It was a selfie leave campaign. We got as far as a 10-minute rule bill in Parliament, and that's how I got working with the team at Pregnant Then Screwed. Pregnant Then Screwed have been around for about 5 years. They're a charity that, again, started off with workplace discrimination against mothers and pregnant women. And we've now branched out to also doing an awful lot of campaigning, because I think a lot of the things that these guys have been talking about is the fact that a lot of the laws in this country don't actually address the needs of women. So it's not just about informing women of their rights and supporting them, but it's actually changing some of the rules that their rights are based on. And I think we've seen it probably over the whole 5 years that Pregnant Then Screwed has existed. The gaps in the laws that maybe don't work for women, the way that things are designed, but in COVID, that has just been amplified. The fact that laws are obviously being made really quickly because it's a massive crisis means that pretty much every week there's been a massive issue for us to address, probably the same as all the politicians on here. So there'll be an announcement and then your inbox is full, whether it's a local lockdown and people asking about informal childcare, whether it's the point at which pregnant women are suddenly classed as vulnerable. All those things have huge implications for probably all of our constituents. So in COVID, it's really been amplified. The calls to our advice line went up by 400% during COVID. We gave free legal advice to over 4,000 women, and I've lost track of how many campaigns we've actually launched in order to get bits of guidance clarified or changed. And we are currently also taking the Chancellor to court over discrimination against women who've received the self-employment income support scheme, because women who've been on maternity leave have had their income reduced compared to women who haven't been on mat leave. So we've been pretty busy throughout this pandemic. On a personal level, I've also sort of got myself into politics. Through Pregnant Then Screwed, we started an event called Pregnant Then Elected. similar to this, asking mothers to get into politics, giving information. It was a cross-party event. We had some fantastic speakers. And at the end of it, one of the MPs that was at the event actually said to me, "Oh, Olga, you should stand." And I hadn't really considered it. So I took my own advice and stood in the last election in Croydon South.
Thanks all. I'm just jumping on. Oh, Alexa, there you go.
Hi, sorry, I sometimes find it really difficult to come off mute. I would like to ask you all, like, how COVID, but particularly our parliamentarians, how COVID has changed things, and do you think that it's improved matters, or can you see it just reverting back to factory settings once the pandemic is over? So who would like to take that? Maybe you'd like to kick us off, Siobhan?
Well, so I've obviously been working in the constituency for the majority of the pandemic and or pregnant and isolating. But so on returning to Parliament in the last couple of weeks, we do have a proxy system in place now. So parliamentarians can vote from home, and particularly if they are shielding or have any medical concerns, and that's quite helpful. I think it's made Parliament much more flexible for people. The rule now is that you can participate in debates and ask questions, obviously virtually, and then still have your proxy to vote, which is quite useful, because it means that there is flexibility. I think is that what Olga has said, is COVID's kind of highlighted and magnified a number of different issues in Society for Women and for mothers. There's been the campaign that Pregnant and Screws worked with one of my colleagues, Alicia Kearns, about mums and dads who are going through pregnancy that weren't able to have appointments together. So there's a huge amount of interest in that, and the Prime Minister was on his feet, I think, last week, confirming that there'll be 15-minute tests rolled out, and that trusts really do need to make sure that parents have access. So I think COVID has done what it's done to all aspects of society, not just to Parliament. It's highlighted and shown up any cracks. The technology has filled some of those cracks, but I don't think it's gone far enough, and I think we probably will see a revert to a more physical presence once the COVID threat has reduced, mainly because of just the way this place operates. And there was a debate in Parliament this week about how we're still having to have a debate to have a discussion about how proxy should work, etc. So it's not a natural step. So I do see there being a reversion to the previous system.
Yeah, and when we had our small period of grace, we did in Prime Minister's questions, we did have this period where the Prime Minister would, anytime someone wasn't in the Houses of Parliament, would say, "Well, I'm very disappointed to see that you couldn't come to your workplace today." So it doesn't see that may be something that is ongoing, unfortunately. Bethan, how about you? Do you think that measures have helped at all? Do you think that it's just a blip and we'll go back?
Well, I think that we have entered into some sort of a new normal with these new systems, but from speaking to my staff and from other women, I think it still poses problems to have working from home, especially when the schools were closed, because you could be on a lot of Zoom meetings, but then you were still having to deal with the childcare, and like other panelists have said, it's mostly the women that are still doing that. So it's how do we make sure that this new normal of hybrid style Zoom plus going out to meetings where we can and where it's safe, how can we make that work for families so that it is flexible and that it doesn't put more pressure on women in our society? You know, much like the workforce issues that Pregnant and Screwed have highlighted during COVID, you know, sometimes that's exacerbated the issue, and we don't want to go into a situation where it makes it worse. As an elected representative, I'd say, though, that there's quite a lot of an issue with presenteeism, even for politicians. So, for example, sometimes I couldn't get to a constituency meeting of an evening, and then people would be like, oh gosh, we're so annoyed that Bethan didn't come to that meeting. But then I would have had to have, you know, missed a debate, or I wouldn't be able to get out of a debate because of voting. So now that I can go to those meetings on Zoom, it sort of eases that rush from A to B all the time to try and be everywhere for everybody. So in that sense, I think there will be some improvement. I think the Senedd was one of the first parliaments to introduce the hybrid model, so that there were politicians going into the Senedd, but also people voting and debating at home via their internet. There were some blips, which I won't mention here tonight, but it has seemed to be working well. I'm a guinea pig for proxy voting. My colleague, Dr. Di Lloyd, is voting for me week in, week out. But I would say we should just have digital voting anyway, and then there would be potentially less need for me to have that proxy vote, because I could just vote while I was at home looking after my little baby. And just finally, I'd say there are some debates that we are looking for to progress here in Wales, so that we can ensure that these issues are on the table. On the 9th of December, for example, I'm going in as a Keeping in Touch Day, potentially you could call it, for a debate on pregnancy in COVID, about the fact that you can only have your partner in with you in the hospital during active labour. That was the same for me. I had a pretty traumatic birth as well, and my husband had to leave after I had my emergency C-section, an hour after I had that C-section, and you know, he was in there anyway. Of course we want to make this safe, but I think that it was something that was totally traumatic for me and for lots and lots of other women. So that rule has to change, and we are campaigning on that, because health is devolved. So of course that would be different to the campaign that would be happening in England. So there are pluses, but there are minuses too, and we have to work through it together, and we have to make it a positive change, as opposed to putting more burdens on women than we already have on us in society.
I mean, I think that example there shows just why we are heartbroken that you are going to be leaving politics, Bethan, because we need that kind of passion and that voice and that first person experience. Because if you haven't experienced it, why would, you know, it's, you can, you know, your head can say, oh yes, it could be traumatic that you know, a woman doesn't have her partner there for the entire labour. But if you haven't experienced it, and if you haven't been through labour, frankly, then you wouldn't know quite how terrifying it can be. There's a question here that I'd really like to open out to all of you, and to my shame, I don't know the answer to it. Do we know of other parliaments where MPs have better maternity leave, or where they have systems which help parents? Kizzy, it feels like this might be something you know about, but I'm sorry if you don't.
No, I know a little bit about it. I don't have an excellent geographical knowledge of all maternity parliamentaries, but I had a very good conversation with a journalist a little while ago about Denmark and their parliamentary system there. And they do it slightly different to us, my understanding of it, which is, if there's any Denmark experts online, I apologise in advance for this, but they have kind of collective groupings, I guess more like councillors, ward councillor type situations, where they will step in a formal way, not an informal way, in a formal way, and cover each other's roles. And you have more of a kind of locum role who will fill in the gaps in some ways. And I do know there are other parliaments who definitely have better systems for this. I was actually in the Good Parliament report earlier reading that I think it was, oh, Sarah's going to correct me on this, I can't remember if it was 30% or 60% of parliaments have some kind of formal maternity provision, and then around 30% have nothing at all. I think it was 60% who have a parliamentary maternity provision, which is equal to the civil service parliamentary provision in that country. 30% have nothing at all. So there are definitely areas and countries that do this better than us, like many that do this better than us and who recognise. And I do think proxy voting has obviously made a big difference to ours, and it's a massive improvement on where it was a year ago, but clearly not the full answer.
Brilliant. I'm glad you were the right person to ask. I had a feeling that you would be. And this is open to everybody, but can you all give me one thing that you think would really change the situation? Some of them will be more obvious than others, perhaps. Kizzy, as you're already with us, why don't you kick off?
I mean, I think obviously I'm going to say locums, but if you kind of park that to one side as a very obvious answer, do you know, I think about just the massive late nights in Parliament, aside from the proxy voting situation. You know, if you've got a constituency that's far away and you're based in Westminster, how do you do that and have a family? I don't know the answer to that question. And, you know, even as me, somebody who's had some experience of being in Parliament, the idea of doing that with a young family, I just don't know. So I think that a very, it seems like quite a basic change in just changing the working hours, trialing normal working hours for Parliament, which is doable. All of this is doable with the political will, I think would make a massive, massive difference, because I think you look at what being a parliamentarian is, and it seems it's a lifestyle choice, and it's a massive, massive thing to do, voting till 11 at night. You know, that's a big decision to make your life. So I think normal working hours, and people will criticize, I'm sure, saying normal, you know, it's not a normal role, but something akin to normal working hours, or the ability to do more hybrid, I think would make a massive difference for the types of people who get enrolled, alongside with helping people finance campaigns. I realise that's more than one thing, sorry.
That's okay, I will let you off. How about Siobhan? What would you recommend? How could we make Parliament more welcoming to mothers, particularly new?
I think the hours is a really important. I was talking to a fantastic London Labour MP about this yesterday, and another one of my colleagues as well, that we don't need to start at sort of 11:30 or 12 and then go to sort of 10, 11 at night. We could start earlier. The Mondays is important to start later, because there's colleagues from around the country and from Scotland and all over the place. But I think the hours is one. But on my idea, I think it's childcare. I mean, and I think that's childcare not just for Parliament. That is childcare across society. It needs a massive overhaul generally. I mean, I do not understand the hoops that families have to jump through, you know, having to be employers to hire a nanny, for example, or, you know, the paperwork and the confusion around the 30 hours, or just you know, the extra steps. I think childcare should be within the tax system. I think it should be affordable. I think we should look really a lot more affordable. I think we should look quite carefully at options and what's working in other countries. It won't be a cheap fix, and it may be a long-term ambition, but I do think there needs to be some changes with that, and it's certainly something I'd like to work on in here.
Well, we'll all look towards that with bated breath, Siobhan. Be careful, or else you'll get yourself put down as a revolutionary. Olga, what about you?
I don't think there's one easy fix, but I do think it's the same things that are going to get more women into top jobs across society. So I think I completely agree with Siobhan. Childcare is massively important. So both the formal childcare, but also childcare within the family. So actually encouraging and enabling men to do the same amount of childcare and looking after the home as women do currently. So at the moment, our maternity leave system does not allow that. Paternity leave is very short, it's badly paid, and self-employed people don't get any paternity leave at all. So that instantly sets a pattern in families as to who does the caring. So I think if we're looking at parental leave reform, I think enabling fathers to take a more active role of looking after their children is going to be huge to help women progress in the world of work, whether it's politics or any other job.
Thank you so much. And Bethan, what would your be the one thing that you would change that could make Parliament more accessible to women?
Well, like I said in my opening statement, for me, it was a matter of standing or not standing again. And had I had a job share opportunity, then it wouldn't have been a question in my mind. So I definitely would instigate job sharing, because that would have meant that I would have felt comfortable in standing again. And I hear what you said, and it's nice to hear somebody say that. But I think, you know, I'm somebody who suffered from depression before. I get anxiety quite a lot. So for me, I just couldn't think of how I would do it. And what I don't want to see is, and I don't say that it's happening here, but sometimes I've done media interviews and then they found another MP with a child who isn't standing down, who is managing to juggle it all, and they're doing this compare and contrast thing on us, and that's exactly what I don't want to do. I don't want to have a discussion about me and another woman. As Kizzy said, this is institutional. I had to fight to get some form of locum, whether it's staff or whatever. I've had to fight to get proxy. I'm now fighting to try and get childcare. This is me, one person. I'm a campaigner, but I shouldn't have to do this day in, day out. It has to be institutionally changed. And I think the other thing I would change is just moral support sometimes to women. You know, I had reselection in the middle of, you know, my child was 2-3 months old, and they was expecting me to run a reselection campaign in my party to stand again. I mean, I just could not do that. So we've got to have discussions to change culture in all political parties so that we can support women and say, what do you need? Instead of saying, well, you've just got to do this like normal. You've just got to click your fingers and you know, carry a child around with you and re-stand for your seat. I just could not do it. So we've really got to put those support structures in place so that we don't feel alone in politics, because quite often I feel isolated. I feel it's totally toxic. I feel that, you know, it's so negative. But then again, I know when I go to my area, the campaigns are so positive, we can make changes, and I love it. So, you know, we have all of these emotions going around in us, but what I would say is work together more as women. We just don't do that enough, simply.
Bethan, don't leave. let's get that job share. We've got to find some solution. So on that, this is what we think should happen. These are the areas which we think would make the real difference. But how do we action that change? How do we get people to listen? I mean, from my perspective, I always, if I ever interview an MP, a male MP, I always ask how they juggle having, and they've got children, I always ask how they juggle having a family life and being an MP. It's a very, very small thing, but it always feels like I've got to remind these people that they also have children, and that they, you know, they should be talking about that as well, because I totally hear what you're saying. It always feels like the responsibility for that change is placed on your shoulders. And, you know, as a female parliamentarian, you want to get on with changing things. You want to get on with, you know, the job. You don't want to have to carry the responsibility of also changing the system. But how do we make people listen? Is it through parliamentary parties? Is it through wider public campaigns? You know, how do you think we can actually make a difference as individuals here tonight?
So I would say, and I do want to kind of stand up for some of my male colleagues, as all of my male. I do feel really supported. I feel supported across the House. People have been lovely since I've been back, but my party have been checking in with me, my colleagues, my whips, and also people from this kind of main political party as well. And I know colleagues, like senior colleagues like Tom Tugendhat, he was busy changing a nappy while doing an interview live on Radio 4. Yeah, there's a lot of a lot of dads with young children in here, and they are rocking it, and they've got, you know, wives that are out of work, and they're juggling just like lots of people. And I think I want to correct myself. I don't think it should always be about childcare either. When I made my previous point, it should be just about caring responsibilities, because it's not about just getting young women into Parliament. It's about getting women across the age groups. And we know that that caring responsibilities for elderly relatives and parents often fall to women as well, and the juggling starts there. So I think those change. But how do we get people to listen? I think keep standing. I think if anyone that's listening is starting to think that it's a good idea, like Olga, you know, get up there and stand and make those cases. Get onto Bethan and get her to give you some tips on making a passionate case for things, and you know, do those town hall debates and get people listening, because the more people that put themselves forward, even if we don't win, we've been there, we've been on the leaflets, you know, you never know what young woman or middle-aged woman or older woman has seen that leaflet and been inspired by what you've said. So I definitely think that it's getting active.
Can I ask if is there any kind of cross-party WhatsApp group on this? You know, like, are women across the political divide? Is there debate about how, you know, how to put those simple things in place? You know, how to push for locum MPs or things like that?
not that I'm on, so maybe there is. I'm not invited, but no, not that I'm on. I mean, it has been a really odd year. So you got an awful lot of new MPs across the House, and we haven't really kind of found our feet because we were all sent scattered across the country because of COVID. But it's not a daft idea, and certainly the Labour MP I was talking to yesterday actually suggested having a coffee, which I thought was great. It was novel and very modern, just sitting down and having a coffee, which is good.
Sorry, Olga, you're thinking about going into the political fray. Have you got an action plan for if you make it to Parliament? You know, what would you like to see happen, and how do you think you might go about that?
Well, I'll start that WhatsApp group, Siobhan. I
Be on it.
I mean, my politics is informed by feminism mainly and wanting equality. And if it means getting more women into Parliament, I'm not a tribal person with my politics. I just want to make, the same as probably everyone on this panel. I think we just want to make things better. So in whatever way I can, either working for a charity or campaigning, if there's anything that I can do to get more women into Parliament, to change laws so that all of us can be more successful and happier and safer in our work, then I'm all for it. I haven't really got a plan, basically.
Can I just tell a very quick story about cross-party working, Alexandra? So there's a lady called Baroness Anne Jenkin, who has been campaigning for decades to get more women into politics. And
I'm a big fan of Baroness Jenkin.
She's just most energetic person I've ever met in my life. But she started Women to Win with Theresa May sort of 15 years ago, I think. But she told me a story years and years ago about the late Jo Cox, and she said she always knew Jo was a really special person when Jo came up to her in the House of Parliament one day and said, "I've met this lady. She is just the perfect person for an MP. She ain't one of us. She's one of you, but I really want you to push her forward. Please take her." And I always remember that, and that's why 50-50 Parliament and the cross-party ones are really good. And I do think some people don't know what their party stripes are, and to me that's interesting, because you should be introducing them to lots of different people and let them make their own mind up. But if they're not part of the Conservative group, I really try to make that introduction based on that kind of story about Jo Cox, and we know from lots of stories about Jo Cox how special she was, but I do try and remember that.
Yeah, as someone who, I report a lot on these issues and have done for quite some years, and I'm always struck by how much cross-party work goes on actually behind the scenes. I mean, on many things, I think that we don't realise just how much that happens, but particularly when it comes to women supporting other women. And I always think that's really heartening. Kizzy, can I ask you a question? You have had this, taste in the cauldron, and you talk about a baptism of fire. Is being an MP something that you can see in your future?
The honest answer is I don't know. I think in the role, when I stepped into that role and we talked at the interview, what things going to come up. Probably Brexit was going to be a big deal at that point. There's a lot of local constituency issues, and then there was a general election, and then there was a Labour leadership election. Labour Party kind of imploded a little bit. And then there was a global pandemic. And I think if you'd asked me that question in April, as Stella did, my answer was absolutely not. Thank you very much. This has been a great opportunity. I'm really looking forward to having some sleep and having my life back. And, like all the stuff that Bethan was talking about, it was very real in those moments, staying up till midnight and talking to people. And, the real life stuff that I think we don't see that much from our politicians. You see them standing in the House, you see them making big speeches and stuff. You don't see them talking at midnight to people whose family are in a ward on a ventilator and they're worried they're going to die. You don't see them fighting for those kind of causes. And that's the stuff that, especially in that situation when I was also shielding for my daughter, that was very isolating to be in that moment and to not know where to turn. So in that moment, the answer was a definite no. I think thankfully time has moved on and rose-tinted glasses have come. And I think the answer is probably yes at some point in the future. I'm I have a small child, I have a 5-year-old. You know, at the point of this whole conversation, I don't know how I could do that and stand to be an MP. I literally don't know what the practicalities of that look like. But hopefully I have a long life ahead of me, and I am quite opinionated about stuff. And so I suspect I will try and log my opinions about at some point in the future. But I think in the short term, possibly council elections are coming up. Maybe we'll see.
Well, I'm sure I speak on everybody here's behalf and saying, please do. We need more women like you, and more gobby women is the best, you know, is really what we need in Parliament. Can I ask what advice you would give to other women who were thinking about entering the political fray, having had this insight into Parliament? And I'll open that to the other panelists as well after you've spoken, Kizzy.
I mean, from my point of view, I think, very lucky. I think Stella said at the interview that every candidate who went for that job asked about abuse and security, and because, you know, it was very live at that point when I was going for the interview. Stella had posters up of people all around the constituency, very, very personal attacks on her. So it was very live for me. And actually, I've been very lucky. I haven't experienced any of that abuse. And partly that's because my role was constituency based, and so I wasn't having to vote on things. But also, you know, I think I found the value and the joy of local people, a bit of what Siobhan was talking about. Like, most people are kind and nice and generous and supportive. The amount of lovely comments I've had from people in the role and people in the street saying, you know, it's amazing, you're doing a great job, is really heartwarming. So I've been very lucky, and I have been shielded from a lot of the negativity, I think. But also there's a real warmth to it, and I think the ability to make a difference. And I think, actually, I must say, seeing firsthand the role of the council and councillors has really opened my eyes to the difference you can make in that role. I think is important, and that role is much more accessible for all sorts of reasons. So I think I would say, you know, it's not an easy route by any stretch, but the ability to make change, and if you're somebody who wants to make a difference in the world and wants to make change and is willing to put yourself on the line, I would definitely, you know, give it a shot. It's an incredible thing to be part of, and there's no question that it's hard. But if you're up for it, I would definitely put your hat in the ring and just see what happens. I never thought I was going to get that role. I never in a million years, I would have bet mortgage payments that I was never going to get it. And, you know, here I am now. So I think back yourself a little bit and put yourself on the line and see what happens.
Amazing. Bethan, how about you? What advice would you give?
Well, I think confidence is always a thing for women, at least it might be here in Wales. I think always we talk down at ourselves, at least I still do that. So I think we need to put processes in place to allow for women to feel that they can find the confidence within themselves to stand. And that means that processes within parties have to change. For example, we still have these very dry, very formulaic interviews to get yourselves on the lists within the party. And that may not suit everybody. It may not suit the style of person we want to attract as being a candidate. So I think we have to think about those things. And we have to think about, if we're going to attract mothers, especially, you know, if we're going to have conferences, if we're going to have meetings, we have to ensure that childcare comes around with that and support to allow for that woman to put herself forward. Before I did this tonight, I asked Sarah what would help her, and she was saying, well, you know, I need to have support to put the graft in, because if nobody knows who you are, then it's very difficult for party faithfuls to be able to support you in any election, because they simply don't know you. So even if you're a woman watching here today, you don't, you know, care about my particular politics, but you think that you could talk to me, then that's what I would say as well. You know, contact a female MP or MS or MSP in Scotland. You know, have those discussions. We are approachable. We're not, you know, always bolshy and ranty. We can have those human conversations and talk about the reality of standing and how that would affect you. You know, I am standing down, but I obviously want people to put their names forward, and I can just be frank about that and give more opportunities for us to share those frank views with other women, regardless of your party political allegiance, so that we can work together to do that. But ultimately, I think it comes down to confidence. And, you know, there will be men the world over who will want to trample all over you, but just make sure that you are sound in your knowledge, sound in your belief system enough to stand against that. And I think that's what Siobhan was saying, and I would urge Kizzy to do, because we have that inner confidence. It's just about how we utilize that and how we can bring that forward in a respectful and progressive way.
And Siobhan, what advice would you give to somebody who was considering a move into politics?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First one, make the application. I think there was some, I know we've got some super duper academics on here. I've seen them flipping up on the chat. But my understanding is that, you know, if a bloke thinks, oh, I might be an MP, by tomorrow they'll have made the application to be an MP. Whereas women will feel, well, I'm not really sure I'm going to be able to do that. And I, you know, what about this? And I have to, and exactly what I did. You know, I think that's the first one. So make the application. You can always withdraw it if you really don't like it in the future. Just get on. And councillor is a brilliant, brilliant role. I loved being a councillor. Get involved with your local politics, and or if you don't really want to get involved with politics, get involved with a local community group or a charity. And I think that's where I mean, I'm nosy. I've said that already, but I am just fascinated by people's lives and hopes and dreams, and I love understanding what makes people tick. And I think those community groups, those people on the ground, they actually understand far more about society and about what's going on outside your front door than anybody in this house. You know, they're the real sort of diamonds. And I think the other thing is to realize that there's no one single person types or skill set that is good for being in politics. Like, I flunked school, didn't do very well at all, didn't go to uni, and I just worked and claw my way up, and I think that you don't need sort of academics, you don't need any of that if you've got that the love for the work and a love for helping and making a difference. And so yeah, do get involved. I think on social media, don't read the comments. That is the advice I got from all MPs when I joined. They were like, never read underneath your comment. I was like, well, I'm quite interested to see what people think. No, don't do it, it's just a disaster. And that is really true. Don't read the comments. And it's a shame, because the platforms are designed for to and fro, but unfortunately they've been hijacked. And yeah, unless you don't want a night's sleep, just don't read the comments. Make your point and get off.
I would only disagree with that, because I feel like there are good people there, so I like to engage with people so that I can try and get some sort of form of discussion. I get what you're saying, but like, if you don't read it, then sometimes people think you're removed from them and someone else is running your account, and I'm like, nah, that's me. I want to engage and I want to get stuck in. But I get what you're saying. It's hard.
No, it works. I think, well, that's a really good point, actually. Different, or horses, of course, it works for different people. I just find it reduces the abuse if nobody thinks I'm going to respond. But I watch, you know, some of my friends, like Nimco Ali, my friend, she is incredible. You know, she goes backwards and forwards all the time, and I love that about her. So it does, yeah, that works for some people.
I think another thing for people to think about that are thinking about getting into politics is that a lot of the parties offer training specifically for women. There's like Women to Win for the Conservatives. There's Labour Women's Network that offer training courses. I don't know what Plaid do or the SNP, but there's definitely, I would say, if you go on the website of your party, have a look. There's a lot of training opportunities, and also cross-party ones. Parliament Project offer cross-party training opportunities as well.
Yeah. And am I on mute?
You are now.
See, I told you I'm absolutely useless at the mute button. I do like 17 Zoom calls a day. You'd think I would have mastered it by now. So I think that's just some amazing advice there. So, you know, find your inner confidence. Apply, just go for it, you know, take a bet on yourself. You can do it. Find your way of coping with social media and critical comments, and that might be, you know, finding that inner confidence. It might be that you enjoy engaging in those, or it might be that, you know, you decide not to feed the trolls. And like Olga said, you know, there are amazing networks there to help women enter into politics, and you know, we need that to happen. It's such vital importance to all of us. So like I said, I am too, you know, I love being a journalist too much, so I'm and also I've got too many dodgy pictures on Facebook. I can't ever be an MP, but I would love everybody else to become an MP. So And remember also, just from a journalist perspective, that there are allies in the media. I mean, it may sometimes feel that, you know, that the opposite is the case, and there are certain sections of the media in this country who do often seem, you know, out to get particularly females in politics. But there are allies in almost every paper that you read, even the Daily Mail. So, you know, do try and find them, utilize them. Any woman writing about feminism will want to hear from a female MP, particularly, you know, ones who are working together. I think we're going to be able to wrap up for the evening. It's been absolutely brilliant to hear from you all. Thank you everyone who's attended and who's come tonight. Thank you to Beth and Olga, Kizzy and Siobhan. I've learned so much about what it's like being an MP, and it's really actually inspiring to talk to you all. And it really gives me hope that things will change when, you know, we have such amazing women pushing for it. So thank you everyone tonight. If you have any more questions, you can always get in touch with Centennial Action, and or you can always you know, ask me if there's anything that I can help with. I'm at Lexi Topping on Twitter. I'm always happy to field any questions. Hannah, do you want to say anything else, or should I close up?
No, just thank you everyone. Yeah, it's been brilliant to hear from you all. I've been scribbling away so many notes, so I thank you, and I'm sure everyone else has too.
Thanks everyone. See you again.
Very much.
Bye.